Call this Williamsburg City Council meeting of August 7th together. Welcome, everyone. Ms. McKay, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Ms. Kernshire? Here.
Okay, in terms of matters of special privilege, we have the consideration of and approval of a remote participation request from Councilmember Caleb Rogers, who is out of town at the moment. Motion to approve, or should we not let him in?
I move that we approve his remote participation.
Second.
Ms. McKay?
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernshire? Aye.
Welcome, Mr. Rogers. Assume you're there.
Thank you for approving. Good to be here from across the world.
Glad to have you. All right. Number 4 on the agenda is items for City Council meeting. Council purview, Mr. Trivette.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For the agenda, we've got a pretty light agenda for this week. We only have 2 items under new business. The first is a consideration of a bid for replacing the Triangle Building storefronts, and the second is the same, consideration of a bid to do the repairs and renovations at the Quarter Path Rec Center related to the fire at the Williamsburg Farmers Market office, as well as opening and renovating the bathrooms on the back of the building.
Good. Thank you very much. Any questions for the city manager? We'll move on to public comment. If anybody would like to come forward, please state your name for the record. Seeing no one in the audience, close the public comments and come back to background presentations and discussions. First, we have presentation on the 2023 legislative update. Ms. Shelton.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Every summer we try to do a legislative update for council at one of the work sessions. This is not intended to be an exhaustive overview of everything the General Assembly did. It's just to hit some of the highlights. There's a legislative agenda book in my office that includes everything related to local governments. If you are interested in coming and looking at it, you're welcome to do that. We're just going to hit a few this year. It was a pretty light session, as it turns out. I did want to touch and start with marijuana. As you know, a couple of years ago, they set up a framework for a retail market that had to be readopted. It was not readopted. The legislation to adopt a retail market was not passed this year, and so we are sitting essentially where we were, where a small amount of marijuana can be possessed legally but not sold in the Commonwealth. They did pass 2 bills. One that reduces the number of THC that can be in hemp products sold in Virginia to 0.03%, or 0.3%, which is less than was allowed before, and also to make it a Class 1 misdemeanor to advertise any material in the Commonwealth related to marijuana for substances that can't be legally sold in the Commonwealth. A few bills about taxation. The Virginia Department of Taxation is now required to annually publish on its website the current transient occupancy tax rates imposed in each locality. That bill also provides for specific information that accommodation intermediaries have to provide to localities, so daily rate that they charge, and nights sold, any exceptions to that. There's a list of things that they have to report when they report that to the localities. There is a provision in HB 1685 that specifies what has to be in our notice to individuals who are paying taxes. We have to provide the amount of the penalty charged for late application fee, for underpayment of estimated taxes, and late payment of the tax. Those have to be specifically set out in that communication with the taxpayer. When we charge those penalties and interest, those also have to be specifically spelled out to the taxpayer. HB 1942 alters the notice requirement that we send to each individual taxpayer for their real estate. So this is the assessment notice that we are sending to each taxpayer to include the lowered tax rate necessary to offset the increased assessment. So whatever our tax rate is this year, if the tax rate the assessment increases next year, we have to tell them what the tax rate would need to be lowered to in order to offset that assessment. So for example, if the assessments went up 3%, and to get the same amount of tax next year, we would lower that tax rate to 58 cents, for example. We have to provide that. We also then have to provide the effective tax rate increase if the tax rate's going to stay 62%, for example. So it provides more information on that individual assessment that's sent to each taxpayer. HB 2110 extends the maximum duration of installment payment for the delinquent real property taxes from 60 months to 72 months. So when we make an arrangement for someone to pay delinquent property taxes, there's a limit to how long those payments can go on, and that's been extended by 1 year. House Bill 2414 allows for a disabled veteran or their surviving spouse to apply for a real property tax exemption for a property they intend to purchase. So they're allowed to apply to ensure that they get that tax exemption before they purchase the property. We have to make that assessment within 20 business days and provide a response to them within that 20 business days. The response has to say the amount of the tax exemption approved, but the exemption only becomes effective if they purchase the property. So it allows them to know whether they're going to be exempt or not. And that exemption follows the disabled veteran, and this is required by the state constitution, so it's going to follow them from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The definition of home solicitation was modified by state code, and it's that without prior invitation or appointment language that's been added to the definition. The city code follows the state code definition, and so I'm just including this because you're going to get this ordinance in front of you, and I just want to make you aware that we're going to have to do a housekeeping ordinance to fix that. House Bill 1572 provides that it is a Class 1 misdemeanor for any person to knowingly report or cause another to report a false emergency communication to emergency personnel. If that communication results in serious bodily injury, it's a Class 6 felony. It's a Class 5 felony if that communication causes a death. For example, if there's an accident on the way to the scene and someone is seriously injured or they're killed as a result of that accident, then it could be a Class 6 felony or a Class 5 felony. Localities in this bill are authorized to adopt an ordinance that a person convicted of that false communication shall be liable for the reasonable expenses of responding to that emergency. And that can be calculated in different ways. It can be time and effort, which is normally how we do this. It's a restitution order that the court typically grants when someone is convicted of a false report. But we can adopt that ordinance, and so you'll see that again. The chief law enforcement officer of a locality is now authorized to impose a curfew during periods of civil unrest. The hours have to be specified as well as the geographic area, and the code contains specific exemptions that have to be included. For example, people traveling home from work or people who are escaping the civil unrest. There is a list of those exceptions. Reasonable efforts have to be made to inform the public in advance of the curfew. The chief law enforcement officer is only authorized to issue the curfew for 24 hours, and after that, the local governing body has to, by a recorded vote, authorize the furtherance of that curfew for an extended period of time. But FOIA rules don't apply, so you get a little break from FOIA. So you meet and you vote without having to go through the notice requirements for FOIA. Violating the curfew, once it's imposed, is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Senate Bill 1459 prohibits a public body or any person or entity contracting with public body from downloading or using any application, including TikTok or WeChat, or accessing any website developed by ByteDance Limited or Tencent Holdings Limited on government-issued devices or government-owned or leased equipment, and that includes mobile phones, desktops, or laptop computers, tablets, or any devices capable of connecting to the internet. And that's while connected to any internet operated or owned or maintained by the Commonwealth. So we can't download those onto city devices, and if a contractor is connected to our devices or connected to state devices, they can't have them downloaded on their computer either. Appointed school board members are now required to complete training by the Virginia Conflict of Interest and Ethics Advisory Council, and this bill's SB 1460 also extends the date by which your disclosure forms are due, so now it's not January 15th, it's February 1st of every year. Senate Bill 904 adds anxiety disorder and depressive disorder as presumptively compensable injuries for law enforcement and firefighters for purposes of workers' comp. This is like PTSD, and it falls into the same categories. So the onset of the disorder must be as a result of a qualifying event, which is an incident or an exposure occurring in the line of duty after July 1st of 2023. And the qualifying events are events that have resulted in serious bodily injury or death to any person or persons, or involving a minor who has been injured, killed, abused, or exploited, or involving an immediate threat to the life of the claimant or another person, or involving mass casualties. Also included in qualifying event are responding to crime scenes for investigation, and that last one is not subject to the July 1st, 2023 initiation date. SB 1086 requires employers with 50 or more employees, and specifically requires political subdivisions to provide 60 days of unpaid leave to serve as an organ donor, or 30 days of unpaid leave to serve as a bone marrow donor. This is in addition to FMLA leave, and the statute says that you may not use it concurrently with FMLA. Employees can use sick leave or paid time off so that leave can be paid, and we are not permitted to consider organ donation as a leave for purposes of break-in service for purposes of benefits. House Bill 1634 encourages localities to consider strategies to address resilience in their comprehensive plans. So it's encouraged but not required, and resilience is defined by the code as the capability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from multi-hazard threats with minimum damage to social well-being, health, the economy, and the environment. House Bill 1665 extends the COVID-19 pandemic land use approval sunset date from July 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2025. You remember that this was granted as an extension when the pandemic began, and this applies to all land use approvals that were granted prior to July 1st, 2020. So it gives them another 2 years. House Bill 2494 requires localities with populations of greater than 3,500 to provide an annual report to the Department of Housing and Community Development summarizing all of our policies, ordinances, and processes affecting the development and construction of housing during the preceding fiscal year. So it includes proffer policies, adoption or amendments of zoning ordinances or subdivision ordinances, revisions to the comprehensive plan, the adoption of incentive programs for affordable housing, changes in our fee structures, permitting and construction of residential development. And those reports are due on September 1st annually. Senate Bill 1404 allows the Virginia Resource Authority to finance projects that are community development projects to include the production and preservation of housing, and that includes housing for persons or families of low or moderate income. This can be a locality developed project, or it can be pass-through funding for a developer who wants to do an affordable housing project. These are grants. There's not a lot of meat on the bones in this statute, and so we're going to have to, if you're interested in proceeding with this, we're going to need to talk to the Virginia Resource Authority. This statute does specifically say that they need to work with the Department of Housing and Community Development to determine which localities are eligible for these grants. I suspect that they're going to be a project-based grant. Localities are, SB 1091, localities are permitted to establish stormwater management funds to assist with BMPs in dealing with stormwater-related costs. And the code this year added condominium owners to the list of groups that can apply for such funding if established by the locality. Council has not established one of those funds, but if council is interested in doing that, we can look at that. SB 1185 extends the moratorium on annexation to 2032. House Bill 2007 requires public bodies to post on their website exactly how we assess charges for searching and accessing records, and noting the current fees charged, if any, for accessing and searching requested records. We've already done this. We charge on a time and effort basis based on the person's hourly rate who searches for the record. Elections. There are two bills that I wanted to bring your attention to. House Bill 1683 requires the city or the registrar to publish notice of the date, hours, and location for registration on the final day of voter registration at least once in a newspaper of general circulation 10 days before that final day. And this is for every last day of final registration before the election occurs. It also has to be posted on the official website for the city. I talked to the registrar, and the city's registrar, James City's registrar, and I believe York County's registrar go in together and do this jointly. And so they already have this under control. And the final bill on this slide, on this slide deck, House Bill 2471, provides that prior to the removal of a general registrar, the electoral board must petition the circuit court and must demonstrate by a preponderance of the evidence that the general registrar has failed to fulfill his or her duty required by law. So this adds a step when the electoral board wants to remove a registrar. And it doesn't matter what it's for, they still have to go through the court system to do that. The actual removal is then done if they meet that preponderance of the evidence standard by the circuit court. The defense is granted by the state general services, not by the city. And I did want to bring your attention to a bill that did not pass this year, which was House Bill 2271. And this was the bill that dealt with short-term rentals. The bill itself effectively exempted from local short-term rental ordinances any short-term rental that was managed by a member of the Virginia Association of Realtors. That bill did not pass, but I just wanted to make you aware of it and the reality that this is likely to come back again next year. This is a topic that is gaining some traction in the General Assembly, and I know that City Council in years past has spent a lot of time looking at maintaining the balance in the neighborhoods, and this has the potential to change that balance. And so that may be something that Council wants to add to its legislative agenda. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Seems like this year there wasn't a whole lot of meaty bills. I know that there was, 1,100 bills passed this year, so this is just the highlight of some
Sure,
things.
and this is a small portion. There are a lot of technical bills that don't really lend themselves to this format, particularly that I did not bring before you, but you're going to see some fixing bills in the city code in the next couple of months.
Well, that was the other thing that struck me. It seems like a lot of bills that just added a lot of work. Different folks, whether it's the lodging industry or you all on staff with FOIA requests and those types of things. I don't have any other questions. I will go back to comment. You know, some of the bills that you mentioned after that hadn't passed, you know, those are some critical ones that we do need to keep our eye on, to include some removal of all zoning laws to.
Housing is a big topic, and there was a study. That was House HJ 507 that didn't pass, but there is another study group looking at housing. it was a big issue 2 years ago as well, getting rid of single-family residential zoning.
Yep, yep. And, you know, I don't know what community that would work for in, but certainly wouldn't work in Williamsburg's. And I think what's unique about Williamsburg is the number of housing, how much land is it, owned by the college and owned in Williamsburg. And so there's such a small residential population that those types of the Airbnb or the speculative change to eliminating single-family density would be significantly impactful. So we need to be on guard for those. So thank you for your presentation. Mr. Vice Mayor, anything?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. Thank you for the presentation, but again, I do appreciate you bringing up the short-term rental and having the opportunity to spend some time at the General Assembly with Michelle. There was an awful lot of discussion about that on the floors there, so I agree that it's going to be something that'll be back.
Thank you. I actually did just have a couple of questions. One thing I'm just curious about with respect to the SB 1455, it's the curfew, giving authority, that 24-hour authority. Is the definition of period of civil unrest already in the code, or is that, and again, I'm just curious if that could, because who decides what's a period of civil unrest, or whether that's something that's kind of already in the code itself?
So, yes, it is.
Okay, it's already there. Okay. And then with respect to SB 1404, which is the housing, the VRA authority to finance projects, and I do understand that it sounds like there's, what does this mean exactly? And moving forward, what could these kind of grants to assist with, community development projects for, that may be affordable housing? I would be curious though, and interested in at least finding out more about what kind of ordinance would be necessary that might enable City Council and Williamsburg to be in a position, should, as this program develops and gets more meat on the bones, that we might be in a position to be able to access funds like this.
So it's going to have to be something that enables City Council to pass it through to the developer.
Okay.
And that's going to be a bare minimum, sort of.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just making sure that we're ready should a good project come forward that might meet our concerns about, making sure that we're taking advantage of opportunities to increase affordable housing in our community. So thank you.
Also, Ms. Shear, I talked to Chris earlier today, and I didn't realize it, but apparently city projects would also maybe qualify for the funding. So it's another reason to be ready.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for going through all of them. Like the mayor said, I wondered sort of what the theme was, and what I jotted down was more reporting and additional information. I did have a question about HB 1942, the one about the assessments. And so does that mean that each individual would be notified what their rate would have to drop to equalize, or is it an average?
It's going to be essentially what's in the public notice. So it's going to be what the rate would have to be equalized to based on the city assessments across the board.
Okay, so it wouldn't be mine versus the
No.
mayor's. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rogers, any questions?
Yes, thanks, Ms. Shelton. As always for this report, I appreciated the run through of the short-term rental issue, which I know we're all curious about. Could you help me understand the conversation around the legalization of marijuana? I know it'll be of interest to our community if it is commercially legalized for sales. And I remember years back there being legislation that required a General Assembly 2 years in a row approved that. So without movement this year, does that interest in legalization falter, or can that come back next year?
So there was a bill to bring it back this year that did not pass. I can't speculate about what's going to happen next year, given the breadth of the General Assembly election that's taking place this year. There doesn't seem to be interest on one side of the aisle to do that, and it is where it is. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know that anyone does.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. At least that's all.
All right, well, thank you very much. If no other questions, we'll move on. City Council communications? Anybody have anything? Mr. Rogers, anything?
Nothing for me.
I'll say that I did have the opportunity to tour the construction at the HRBT. Quite an amazing operation to see all of that in action, and so I think what we heard is they're still slated for late 2026 for completion, so seem to be making some good projects, but exciting to be able to see that. Okay, schedule of meetings. You all have in your packet on the agenda the schedule of meetings moving forward. Any questions for those? No?
Just to say that as the liaison to the Economic Development Authority, we are not having our meeting this week. So that's been canceled for August the 9th.
Okay, takes us now to open forum, and again, another opportunity for anybody to come forward to address council. Seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and I don't believe we have anything for closed session. 25 minutes and 55 seconds. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Should we wait till 26? No.
It's 26 now.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay,
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernier?
Aye.
We are adjourned.